Welcome to today's time. We are offering an open house Q&A in response to the previously developed materials on financial sustainability for youth-run organizations. I'm Johanna, and I'll introduce myself in just a minute, but I just wanted to welcome you to this NTAC hosted event. So NTAC is the National Training and Technical Assistance Center funded by SAMHSA and is hosting and allowing this opportunity to occur. This is prepared under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, that's SAMHSA. The contents of today's session and the recordings you received are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views or endorsement of SAMHSA or HHS. If you're not super familiar yet with NTAC, it's a TA center hosted at CARS and made up of a set of collaborative partners. One of those organizations is Youth Move National, which is where Jasmine and I work. And we are excited and honored to lead the training and technical assistance around youth engagement, leadership, transition-aged youth, and peer support efforts. Our center overall is to support the emotional and behavioral health of children, youth, young adults, and families across the country, and supporting the access to evidence-based treatment and recovery services in a well-coordinated system of care. We know that one of the key values and implementation strategies of systems of care is youth-run programming, youth voice, youth leadership, and youth engagement efforts, hence this topic being addressed by the center this year. So welcome, I'm Johanna, I'm the Executive Director of Youth Move National. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am in this work because one time I was a young person in my community. I live in Northeast Iowa, and our community was awarded a federally funded system of care to create a coordinated children and youth mental health system, and I was asked to join our governance board as one of our youth leaders. And that work eventually allowed me the opportunity to learn and grow with other youth advocates and system of care communities across the country. And they introduced me to Youth Move National, and I joined the national board and served a couple of terms as we were growing and thinking about how our network model could allow local youth organizations to affiliate into a network in order to create change and unite our voices. I joined staff 9 years ago and have spent a lot of my time in thinking about how to build capacity and increase sustainability for the youth efforts that grow out of system of care efforts. Really excited to share any of that knowledge that might be helpful to you all today, and curious about your questions and where you want to learn and grow. But I am not here alone. I'm presenting with my esteemed colleague, Jasmine, who has many areas of expertise to share with us all. So Jasmine, do you want to say hello and warm our room up?
Hi, everyone. I am Jasmine Boatwright. I'm a youth programs coordinator here with Youth Move National. Just previous to joining the team here at Youth Move National, I was able to be a county coordinator for youth programming, specifically Wayne County System of Care. I was also able to do some cool community organizing as a young person with some young people in our community. I bring, like Johanna said, a host of knowledge as it relates to youth engagement, especially in different settings and within the system of care. That being said, I would love to hear a little more about who you all are. If you wouldn't mind either unmuting or dropping in the chat box who you are, your name, your preferred pronouns, where you're from, and your location in the world. We would love to know who you are. Is there anyone who would like to go first?
This is that like moment of truth of like, do we talk or do we chat on Zoom? Jasmine and I are super open to engaging with you in whatever works for you and your workflow today.
Yes.
I can go ahead and start us off.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Althessa Jones. My preferred pronouns are they, them, and I'm currently located in Boise, Idaho. I work for Idaho Federation of Families as the youth programs specialist for our youth programs as well as our young adult programs.
Well, Kim, thank you for joining us and thank you for being brave to be first. We do have some responses in the chat box. We have Michelle, Director, Family Resource Network. We also have Amy, New York System, OMH, System of Care, Family Engagement Specialist. Welcome, you guys. Is there anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? All right. We'll give it another minute or so, but I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Johanna.
Yeah, for sure, Jasmine. And we'll just invite folks, as you have questions or contributions throughout today's session, let us know who you are as you start to share. One of the things that I know that has been really important to youth engagement work in my career is being able to connect with people in similar roles with me in other states and communities to glean ideas and inspiration, and sometimes just like a moment to vent and have a safe space to find a new strategy to overcome a challenge. Great, awesome. Thanks, Julie, for joining us from Texas. So what brings us here today? We hope that you're here because you're interested in financial sustainability strategies for YouthRun programs. I'm going to share a little bit about why and how this content came to be, and then make sure everyone's oriented to all of the materials that were disseminated before today's call, in case you're coming in without having reviewed those materials. Jasmine and I participate on the Youth and Young Adult Transformation team at the center, and we're really working to identify needs in the field and then create opportunities, learning, product development, trainings that respond to those needs. And one of the needs that we have seen expressed in communities is that there is oftentimes some sort of impetus or investment that causes youth-led programming to begin in a community. And to us, what does that mean? So youth-run programming, so Jasmine and I both specifically come from communities where something like a system of care grant was the initial investment, the initial dollars, and the reason behind bringing young people together. It is not always a system of care community. It is not always a federal funding grant. Many of you might have a community foundation or a state initiative that says, we really want to hear from young people, and something starts. And then sometimes the thing that started it, especially if it's a grant type program, also ends it, right? We come to the end of a specific grant funding, really robust, amazing youth engagement has happened, and then that specific grant funds are no longer available and the programming ends. And so we've been providing support to a lot of communities who are sort of getting close to the end of a funding stream and really thinking about where are the other dollars that we can support this work, right? And so to answer that need in the field, we developed some of the learning content to share with you all this year. A couple of things to note when we talk about youth-run programs, what that means to us is that we're talking about youth programs or organizations that center youth as decision makers and uplift youth voices with lived experience. A really great example of that is our Youth Move chapters, where we require young people to be the decision makers in establishing the program, guiding what the efforts are, and choosing to affiliate into our network. Young people in Youth Move chapters represent lived experience oftentimes in the mental health system, but also in juvenile justice, child welfare, special education, etc. And so if you are working with young people with lived experience and there's some sort of coordinated youth program in your community, you're in the right place. So that's why we're here today. I want to make sure that everyone has access to all of the materials that were previously prepared. So I'm going to drop a link into the chat box. It would be really helpful for Jasmine and I if you guys could let us know if you've had a chance to listen to either of those recordings or check out any of the resource links on this page ahead of time. So if you have looked at these resources or listened to these recordings, can you say yes in the chat, or like Jasmine's doing, do some sort of emoji, thumbs up, starburst. Great, okay. Oh yes, some of you are finding that. I'm going to, awesome. Okay, thanks, Chris. Perfect. That's super helpful, Michelle. Great. I'm gonna do a quick, excellent. Okay, so I'm gonna do a quick overview of what exists for you all to listen to and engage with at any time, and then we'll move into some Q&A that can really be guided by each of you. So I don't know if any of you have participated in something like a flipped classroom, but essentially Jasmine and I tried to do the boring lecture PowerPoint slide in a pre-record. So you didn't have to come to yet another Zoom session and do that. So we've recorded 2 sessions. They're each about 20 minutes. They're on YouTube, so you can listen to them at the playback speed of your choice. And then throughout those recordings, we reference resources, templates, and examples. Underneath each of the recording on this website page are all of those links that we referenced, okay? So if you get really excited about making a logic model, we've given you an example logic model for one of our programs here at Youth Move, as well as a blank template that you could take to your youth leaders and start working on tomorrow if you want to. Our goal is that those on-demand options live with you into the future. So you can watch them when you have time, you can share them with others in your network. Today's session is sort of like one live opportunity to talk to Jasmine and I if you want to go deeper in any of the content areas. At the end, we'll talk about how you can access us more individually to continue this discussion. Today doesn't have to be it. So the first session is really focused on program development. So a lot of times people show up on TA calls with us and they're like, where do we find money? And we might be frustrated when we say, well, can you tell me about the structure of your program? Do you know what your outcomes are? Are you collecting any data that shows a potential funder that what you're doing is good in the world? And if you say no to us, then we start talking to you about the stuff that's covered in session 1, right? So what does it look like to develop an entire YouthRun program, or maybe one particular project or pillar? How do you document what success looks like? We do this in a way where young people are determining what success looks like, what strategies are chosen, etc. We also talk about the importance of partnership and finding your people, and so you're not duplicating, but rather building on community strength. Part 2 is about money. So part 2, we break down and share a glossary of terms. If you're going to start looking for dollars or already are, what the heck are these RFPs and how am I supposed to know where to find them? We share ideas from our network around fundraising strategies that have been effective for YouthRun programs, some places that we start looking for federal or state dollars, and then places where we look for philanthropic grant opportunities, again, with resources throughout all of that. So those are the 2 sections. I have those slides handy. So if you all are coming with specific questions about any of these things, we'll be able to pull those up and share. Does anyone have any questions? So you don't know me yet. I always ask 3 questions at once, and I'm learning this year to ask 1 question at a time. Has anyone had any difficulties accessing the recordings or the on-demand trainings? Can we help you with any technical components of being able to see this in the future? Oh, great. And some folks are still saying hi. Welcome, Cindy. We're so glad you're with us. Okay, liking the on-demand option. We do too. Okay, perfect. All right. So we asked you all when you registered if you had any questions, but we want to ask you all that again. Oh, Jasmine, did you have a question or you're feeling pretty good? Okay. Does anyone who's reviewed the content already or just taken a quick look at the site right now, are you coming today with any questions you definitely want Jasmine or I to answer, or your fellow colleagues on the call today? Great. Awesome. All answers, contributions today are right answers and right contributions. We have been talking to folks for about the last month, sharing these resources. They've been shared on some previous office hours, so we know there are some questions about them, and we'll start putting those questions out in the space for today's discussion for sure. And I hope that they prompt more questions from you, and know that Jasmine and I are here totally willing to share what our journeys have been. We also know that many of you have had some really great wins and successes of your own. So if you have an idea or a strategy that we're not sharing that you'd like to share with your colleagues, like 100%, raise your hand, interrupt us, drop it in the chat. Deal? Okay. So let's see. I'll start with do you want to start with a question, Jasmine?
Well, yeah, I can definitely ask the first question, and maybe, yeah, we can just jump right in. So if my state has a system of care grant or is going to apply for one, how could our youth program get involved?
I like that question a lot, Jasmine, because last week, SAMHSA just announced that they're going to be funding the next round of System of Care grantees. And so we know that there are folks in states right now who are starting to put pen to paper towards those applications. And whenever we see those announcements come out, the first thing I think about is my youth advocates, right? Who are the youth advocates sitting in states who would be the ideal partners to help move forward the System of Care partnership? And how do we help them get to the table, either for an application process, or you might be in a state where you know that there's a System of Care community funded, but you're not yet engaged with it, right? So what should you do? One thing, so if you're looking to think about finding partnerships to apply for a federal grant like System of Care, we oftentimes see that these grants are written or led by the Office of Behavioral Health or Mental Health in your state. And they're usually led by program staff who are sitting sort of in between community-based service work and sort of the leadership responsible to like legislative agendas, right? And so first we want to figure out who is that person or people in your state who are likely vetting the grant application process. I live in Iowa, so I'm really helpful in helping you find the people that are having those conversations in Iowa. Jasmine, similarly, very helpful in Michigan. In other states, we're pretty good Googlers. So if you're feeling like, who am I supposed to be talking about? We're happy to help you think about where that person might be and how might you reach out and partner. Alternatively, you might already know that in your territory or state, there's a funded System of Care grant, and then you're really interested in, hey, I wonder what their youth engagement strategy is, what's their investment in youth voice, and is there an opportunity for my organization to partner? In that case, we start with the project directors are always posted with public contact information on SAMHSA's website. It's pretty easy to find that first point of contact. And if the grantee is beyond sort of their first year of operations, there's usually a really great online presence that's been developed that we can find. But what do you do next, right? So I think there's a couple things that I think about. These are grant opportunities that prioritize and require youth engagement. So I really think about what do the young people working in our organization have that could be of value to offer to this grant effort, right? And make a little map or list of those opportunities and be ready to make that pitch into partnership. There's also things like all federal grants have deliverables and requirements, and there are many different sort of important things that funders care about counting. And so one thing that system of care grantees are really focused on is partnership counts. And it is entirely appropriate for youth programs to be able to establish a formalized partnership. You want to document it in something like a memorandum of agreement with that grantee. That helps the overall grant goals increase their partnership ticks and also establishes a pathway to formalizing what might our work in this space look like. So many times, it's easy for me to use Youth Move chapters as an example, but about half of our Youth Move chapters have some sort of formalized agreement with a system of care grantee in their community. And about a third of them have a formalized financial contractual agreement, right? So it's pretty common for youth programs to be viewed as a valuable partner. So Jasmine, I think in summary, I'd figure out who is the person or people I want to talk to, what is the value that my organization can offer, and how can I walk us towards formalizing a partnership?
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments regarding the information that Johanna just shared? I'm much like Johanna.
That's a great one.
Ask 4 questions at once. Yeah. So Michelle asked in the chat box, has the SAMHSA grant dropped? Has the SAMHSA grant dropped yet? Or SAMHSA System of Care grant dropped yet? And Johanna dropped that information in the chat box. Thank you.
Yeah, and a note for those of you that are looking at specifically SAMHSA funding right now, the System of Care grants effort are from their Children's Mental Health Initiative portfolio. The acronym you're going to see is CMHI. There are also a couple of other funding opportunities right now with the same timeline as this one that states are looking at right now.
Thank you.
Jasmine, I'm going to ask you a question if I can. And that is, how can we ensure that young people have decision-making authority in youth programs and specifically around budget?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that we hear a lot. One way is definitely what you've mentioned already. The MOUs or MOAs are definitely ways to just kind of highlight how young people, how everyone has a voice in decision making, right? Also, oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking back at the question. My dog is throwing me off here. So how do we ensure decision making in the decision making authority throughout youth programs and budgets? Definitely making sure young people have a place to have voice, making sure that whether it's connecting with them individually or through survey or focus groups or workshops or planning meetings, young people are able to have a place that they feel safe enough to talk about the things that are important to them. Also, making sure that that's what I was talking about with the MOUs and MOAs, things around budgets, that type of transparency are oftentimes outlined within the MOUs and MOAs. Making sure that young people are at the table when budgets are being developed, when grants are being written is also a way of making sure that young people have decision-making authority. And I feel like I'm missing one. Got any thoughts here, Johanna?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to think about is that oftentimes we hear people go, well, we didn't engage young people in the budgeting process because it's cumbersome and frankly boring, and I hate Excel, and probably everyone else does. And so just like busting that myth, I know as a young person who was on the board of a youth organization that was hosted by another organization, the day that we finally got to sit down with the accounting team and have things like an organizational indirect rate defined for us was such a relief, right? Like I've actually wanted to know that the whole time. I just didn't know how to ask it. So thanks for like honoring and seeing that we are interested in that. And then the second thing is that including access and transparency around budgeting and financial information is a form of power sharing. And sometimes we have to own that we may have sort of a protectionist or adult view that is biasing us towards being willing to share power with young people around budget. So we have to confront that, get over that, and know that if we are truly in youth adult partnership space and we are intentionally practicing the value of youth-driven, then that power sharing is a requirement.
And you made a very valid point around budgets being kind of cumbersome and confusing, and who likes Excel other than, you know, you and Cassie. And you guys are right. And that was definitely something that we dealt with here in Wayne County. And I think what we did was we got to a point where, I mean, it was evident that we as young people needed to know, you know, what resources we had. Have you ever tried to plan a program without knowing how many dollars you had? It's virtually impossible, especially to plan a good one. That being said, one of the things that we did was definitely sit down with our leadership, like you mentioned, Johanna, and just kind of had some of those things broken down to us. And that actually became like protocol, that became part of our processes and procedure of like making sure that the information was in a way, it was organized in a way that young people could understand, family advocates could understand. Oftentimes, if it wasn't organized in a way that young people and family advocates could understand, half of the professionals in the room also didn't understand it. So it deemed to be helpful for all our entire system to have that type of process. Thank you for that, Johanna.
Yeah, and it's reminding me of a resource, so or like sort of connecting the dots between a couple of things. So one is that Youth Move, we've become really interested in a process called participatory budgeting. So you might have heard of participatory action research, or PAR. So the people who are affected by the research you're doing should be the ones guiding your work. There is also something called the Participatory Budgeting Project. I'm gonna grab a link and share that with you all, that can really help us get over that like power sharing, transparency, but also education component that needs to go along. And then the second idea I had is that last summer, I think maybe some of you actually participated in a training NTAC offered around youth voice and evaluation. And the third part of that training, we talked about visualizing data and the use of data dashboards. So at Youth Move National, we actually use financial dashboards in the same way of that strategy. So just as Jasmine was saying, like, I know that people's eyes glaze over when they see a full budget in tiny print on an Excel spreadsheet. Same goes for reading monthly financial statements. So we consciously pull the most important pieces of data that we really need to make decisions around into super appealing pie charts, graphs, full of colors, side-by-side comparison of this is where you are right now compared to where you were last year. And we really have designed those in a way to say, we feel confident that if our decision makers look at just that one page of bar graph, if they see it in a PDF, it's not ever in Excel in front of them, they have all of the data at their fingertips that they need to make money. So I love that strategy and evaluation, and I'm really excited that we've been figuring out how to use it in our budgeting too.
Are there any questions or comments? All righty. Well, Johanna, I'm going to ask you another question. Well, we are a program of another organization. How can we secure funding for our own program?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question. And we get it a lot, Jasmine, right? So one instance we'll get it is that there might be, and this is your reality, Jasmine, so I'm gonna make you talk about it in a minute, right? There might be a youth program that's hosted by a governmental entity, right? So maybe Wayne County. So your county government is who is hiring your youth coordinator and your youth advocates. And one challenge that can come from that is that the government structure is far less conducive to traditional fundraising, right? So I don't know about you, but whenever I sit down with a group of young people, they usually decide to change the world by tomorrow. And they usually are pretty enthusiastic, appropriately, about the ability to ask folks in their community to give dollars to let their projects come into life, right? And then we may run into a situation where someone wants to give money, but there's not like an entity to receive fundraising dollars. So in that situation, we really look and encourage you to find a partner in another nonprofit organization whose mission is really aligned with yours, that's focused on youth voice, maybe improving youth mental health or another youth serving system that could serve as sort of a financial conduit to receiving donations for young people to do that specific project in. So sometimes the barrier is our host organization or our incubator, right, isn't able to fundraise. The other thing that we will oftentimes come into is that a youth program might be hosted by a private or nonprofit organization, and it's difficult to get funding to come in to be directly allocated to the youth program, right? So I would really like to write a grant. Youth Service America is one that we share in the resources. They have really great community service grants that send out a couple times a year. Young people are supposed to write them. They're supposed to be youth-driven grants. But okay, but my hosting organization has a totally different name than my youth program. And if the grant money comes into the door, how does it get to like my budget authority as a youth coordinator? So in that situation, it's about getting super friendly with your accounting team, right? And what we're looking for is an agreement with the host organization to have separate budget lines and accounting centers that are specific to the youth program. And there are many ways to do this. A couple of things that you want to look for. You want to have an agreement where there is a very easy way within an organizational budget to say, these funds support our youth efforts. And then you also want a really easy way every month for your accounting team to allocate the dollars appropriately in a way that will generate reports, right? So Jasmine, your example was great. Like, how do I plan a children's mental health awareness event if I don't know what my budget is, right? So first, let's allocate the budget line for the youth-led Children's Mental Health Awareness Project. And then let's give it an accounting center name and code that will allow me January through June once a month to say, this is how much we've expended, this is how much resources we still have remaining, right? There are many creative accounting ways to do this. It's not impossible. You're not asking for the moon, right? These things can and should be done. It's also really, it's generalized accounting practice. If a new funding source comes in, so if a grant is secured for the organization specific to the youth program, it's generalized accounting practice to create a new account center for that, right? So then it's just about determining what sort of reporting information that young people need to have access to on a regular basis. And we oftentimes find that like the first way into the door about that is setting up those reports so that youth first have access to the budget that they have oversight over. That can be a good step as we walk forward with adults who may really need to be coming over their own bias about being transparent about budget information.
There's a question in the chat box. Chris says, do you have suggestions, resources, tips for a funder who's pulling together a funding announcement for youth-led program? What requirements or components could be considered? That is a great question.
Yeah, so one way to think about this, Jasmine, is like if you were applying on behalf of your previous youth programs, right? What would you like a funder to put into that RFP process? What would be helpful or not, I guess, would also be a good answer.
Well, I think the number one requirement is definitely to the application process to be youth-led and youth-driven. Young people leading that work. I think about Youth Services America, and I think about our Dare to Dream. We previously had a Dare to Dream grant where we asked for things like, you know, what's your mission? What's your, what is the need that you're trying to address either in the community or within systems. I'm trying to think of other requirements. I can definitely share the Youth Services America's information with you, Chris, which will give you a lot of insight of kind of how they do their RFP or funding announcements. I'm trying to think other big requirements.
I totally +1 the youth-driven application process and think about that, something that we even mirror like in our chapter application process, and we provide a ton of TA. Like I as a funder am looking for you to show me that you are truly youth-led. I care way less about your use of pronunciation, punctuation, and I care a lot more that you tell me the story of how young people got together and designed the project that you're pitching, right? And so that's something that we have prioritized in our chapter membership application. I'm someone who looks at a lot of youth funding opportunities across the country, and I remember someone sending me an RFP, which is a request for a proposal from a state, and it was called something really great, like building youth networks. And I opened it up. It was in a horrible portal. I'm having a bit of a flashback about it. And after downloading approximately 19 forms, I finally found the form that was outlining the expectations of it. And I got that far into the process before I realized that I wasn't clear about what youth we were talking about, right? Or what sort of network. And I'm really interested from my career space in thinking about youth systems. So I want to work with juvenile justice state advisory boards. I want to work with child welfare state advisory boards. I want to work with our youth move chapters. And I got that far in before I realized that they were really talking about like organizing the youth park and rec departments in their state. And so what I really wish is that they had been super clear up front about how they were defining youth, how they were defining network, so I could figure out like, is what we do even a match for this?
Another thing I would think about is how active it looks like young people are within the work that's being done. Does it look like young people are just present in an advisory council? Are young people really threaded throughout the work? our young people leading activities, our young people on advisory boards, our young people on system-wide governance structures. How our young people, um, I think that helps lend towards the voice of young people throughout the work, how our young people are really being heard in the work that's being done.
I'm putting the question out to everyone else too in the chat box because you may have other ideas as well. I think there's some really great movement around building equity strategies into our funding work. So if you're on the call and you're sitting more in a funder role instead of in a youth applying for role, things like considering the amount of time and the true burden that applying for funds puts on youth programs. Our chapter network, sort of medium range, have like 1 to 3 staff FTE, right? So we're not talking about big, robust organizations that have someone who spends all of their time writing grants. And so what information do I as a funder have to have in order to make a decision? And what's the most direct and streamlined way I can ask for that information? And then how can I ask for information instead of saying, I need your budget put forth in XY template? Send me the budget in whatever template you usually use as an organization, right? That can be a really huge gift to someone who's looking to apply. Are there other ideas or questions from anyone around this topic of thinking about applying for funding?
I know in my experience and just thinking about the Youth Services America grant and why I used to love that grant so much as a coordinator was because it gave you very clear expectations on what the funds could be used for. It lets you know what level of flexibility you had, and if you had questions, who to contact. So it was very clear. Just something that, popped up as you were talking.
Yeah, that's great, Jasmine. And it reminds me of something that I always want to share. So if you're someone who would like to grow your professional experience or your resume around grant writing or just building those muscles, one of the recommendations I have is to try to find opportunities to volunteer to review grants. So I've served as a grant reviewer for SAMHSA grants as well as for the Youth Service America program. And it was so helpful to me to spend a few hours reading through 20 different proposals and seeing, oh, this is how other organizations are talking about explaining their work, or like, oh, this is what it feels like to read an organization's proposal and have it have so much jargon I don't know what's going on, right? And so if you ever have the opportunity to serve as a grant reviewer, I would 100% recommend taking up that opportunity. And a good place to start is to volunteer to a community foundation that you would be interested in participating in their review or selection process in your community. Awesome. Okay, we have more questions if folks don't have others of their own, so we'll keep going for a little bit here to make use of our time. And yeah, Jasmine, can I ask you to talk a little bit about partnership building? So in the recording, we talk about the value of partnership, right? Jasmine, how does partnership help us besides just sort of initially getting funding?
Well, I think it definitely helps with like we're talking about sustainability, right? It helps us make sure that we have access to people. I know when I was a community organizer, One of the things that I learned pretty early on is that if you don't have a ton of funding, a great way to stay relevant, to stay connected to what's going on in your community, to make sure you're in the know of what needs may need to be addressed is by forming some of those partnerships. And so, like I said, as a community organizer, I learned either you need funding or you need people in order to kind of stay relevant. And that means you need people to buy into what you're doing, to the message or that you're trying to send, or the work that your youth program is doing. And so making sure that funding or people, yes. I'm just going back really quickly to make sure. Okay, yes. So beyond funding, partners help with everything from like space. You may need, especially as a youth program, youth programs oftentimes, especially starting, need help with things like space, or like Johanna was talking about earlier, with being a fiduciary agency, an agency that will be able to accept money on behalf of that youth program and help that youth program figure out how to manage their money. Another thing is just that peer learning and coaching. I know for me being in Wayne County and being one of the only youth coordinators in my position in Wayne County, I didn't really know what it meant to develop a program or sustain a program. And so working with other partner organizations, and even though their programs were different, kind of looking at some of the components of sustainability and being able to see it and be a part of it, being in some of those partnership meetings, being in some of those rooms just kind of helped me learn how we were able to continue to grow and sustain our program, and some new tips and techniques along the way, techniques along the way. And so I definitely think, if nothing else, that peer support, peer learning, and being able to attend each other's activities, especially right now we're dealing with COVID. That's one thing that we've definitely seen with youth organizations. We've seen them kind of coming together. In Wayne County, we have a ton of youth groups and youth organizations doing a ton of amazing things. But they were all kind of like in little pockets, kind of working on their own kind of focuses. Youth United in our county has done a really good job of trying to pull those young people together. And now even more with COVID, we've seen that it's harder to find where young people are. You can't just walk into the school and get connected to young people, and recreation centers look different now. So outreach and being able to support activities and being able to help share messages is also a way that partnerships really help us stay sustainable outside of just funding. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
I love that, Desmond. And I think one of the earliest products that maybe you and I even worked on was around a resource around youth mapping projects for this very reason, right? Like, we just were responding to a query yesterday where someone said, how can I recruit youth in my community? And I'm like, well, I live approximately 565 miles away from you, so I'm not sure. And I also know that if I lived in your community, I would be calling my public health department. I would be thinking about contacting teen librarians in the public libraries. I'd be thinking about there's like an ecosystem of places where I would go, and how can we transfer that in community? So network mapping from young people's perspective can be really key to like doing all of that initial partnership work Jasmine was talking about.
Yeah.
Great. And a really good example too about how sometimes we open the door, the first question is, how do I get money? And then we realize actually there are a ton of other resources that we need that are going to be really critical to our sustainability. And we want to be putting time and energy into those as well. I dropped a couple of questions in the chat to see if that was for responses or curiosity. Is anybody showing up today with a challenge in creating partnerships or accessing funding streams that you'd like to workshop with us? All right, as a facilitator, I'm always mindful of folks that are feeling a little more introverted and needing some quiet time to formulate a thought, to be bold. Before we wrap up, we're gonna share with you how you can reach out directly to get some individualized response. If you have a question and you'd rather talk to Jasmine or I or someone at NTAC in a different way. But we have a little bit of time left, so I was gonna share a couple of thoughts around a question we get a lot, which is, I've never written a grant before. What the heck do I do first? And so we've been actually doing some professional development of our own on our team. And we've been spending a lot of time thinking about how to decouple planning and grant writing. So it's super common for you to be sitting and open your email and you go, oh my gosh, there's a funding opportunity. This has our name written all over it. Let's go create a plan for what we want to propose. And sometimes I think that's the reality that time gives us. However, if we decouple these processes and we actually do the planning process first without sort of a funder's RFP in front of us, we may be able to build something that's going to be more effective, mission aligned, and long-term sustainable. So what does that look like? That looks like mapping out what does your organization want to accomplish. We're really interested in starting a new, so using an example, you might be really interested in growing out a creative expression art program that parallels youth peer offerings. So right now, maybe your reality is you don't have a lot of flexible dollars to support this sort of creative expression because your current funding sources have outcomes that are like too strict and don't match that. And so if that was my situation, we'd want to sit down with young people and ask them to think about what the end result is, what are the outcomes we're hoping to achieve, what are the strategies we'd like to implement in, and what are the resources that we might need. We might, in fact, if you listen to part 1 of the recording, make a mini logic model for our new arts program. And we would do that even if we didn't know how we were going to fund it, right? Because that planning process being done ahead of time means that when you're proposing it to a potential funder, you are going to make decisions and pitch what you need and want rather than trying to write what you think the funder wants you to say. Right? So planning without specific grant opportunities in front of you is the first recommendation. There's a bunch of technical specific recommendations, like make sure you read the thing that you're applying for like 28 times and have someone else read it because the devil's always in the details. But I think the other thing that we would sort of less technical and sort of more adaptive in nature is to do what Jasmine said at the beginning of our call time. How do we bring youth into the planning and writing process from the beginning, right? So the first step is not, ooh, let me organize my outline and start pulling materials together. My first step is, hey, what do young people want and need to have happen in my community? And so one thing that can totally happen is that if your strategy that you're proposing in your grant application actually comes from young people because they've written it with you, you can say that, right? That can be really compelling in the story narrative that you're sharing with a funder. And it's going to ensure that the young people engaged in the work of that effort when it's funded get totally what's going on. They know why we've picked these goals. They know what the strategies are because they made them, right? So I would start there. And then know that there are a plethora of resources probably very close to you, lots of community colleges, lots of public libraries, now that it's Zoom, we can access resources in other communities. There are some really great sort of grant 101 experiences if you're interested in learning about. I'll drop a specific course catalog that I've used frequently that is free to access as well in the chat box. All right. Jasmine, do you have any sort of final thoughts before we let everyone know how they can stay in touch and continuing to engage with us?
No, I think that's it. Thank you all for joining us today.
Okay, awesome. All right, I'm doing too many things at the same time here. So first, so a couple things before we end, because we definitely want to hear from you all. NTAC is open to receive technical assistance requests from any of you. There are many collaborative partners and really great experts to support your work. If you'd like to specifically talk to Jasmine or I about something that started here, you can mention our name in the TA request. Otherwise, just tell us what you're looking for and we'll make sure you talk to someone who knows what's going on. Our team is available to support requests around all type of content like this. The link to that TA request form is in the chat box. The recordings are going to remain on demand and available for you. So if you haven't listened to them yet, I would suggest that you take a few minutes to listen to those. If you have listened to them, but you need somebody else in your organization to listen to them to get on board, go ahead and send them an encouraging message to engage in learning with you. We're hoping that those are resources that are available and helpful for you much longer than today's call. And then let's see, Chris, okay. Chris is really looking for examples of a funding announcement. I'm racking my brain a little bit while we're talking here, and we might want to take that as follow-up to this call, which we're happy to do. Nonprofit Ready is an online, on-demand, no-cost learning opportunity that covers some funding and partnership development courses that you might be interested in checking out. Are there other questions or ideas to share today? Oh, excellent. Okay, great. So Jasmine sharing the Youth Service America, again, really great sort of micro grant opportunities for young people to write for. They've helped both Jasmine and I learn to craft our skills, both in grant writing and project management and budgeting. Excellent. I'm super energized that you all came today and that you care about sustaining youth programs in your community and growing youth organizations. Thanks for hanging out with me, Jasmine, and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.